Hello and welcome again, everybody. Welcome back after the short break, and thank you for staying with us for our conversation with our guests. So we had a chance to hear from Merete, Fabien, and Lizzy, and learn more about the projects they do and the way they work, and discover their missions and also the ideas behind what they do. So now we'll have a chance to actually talk with them and to learn more about what they think and how they see certain processes in the museum sector and in terms of like digital transformation. I hope all our speakers are with us, so please switch on your cameras so that we can see you. We already see Merete. I see Fabien is also here. I hope Lizzy is also with us. So what I would like to talk to you about is how digital technologies are helping us to stay relevant for our audiences. And I guess this is something that was kind of like an issue or like important subject for all of you, because you all mentioned different ways in which the digital technologies can help us stay relevant and have impact on our audiences. So, and I know, like in this moment of crisis, we are struggling with certain ways and strategies to actually stay relevant when the actual museums in many places in the world are being closed. So, I also wanted to talk to you a bit about the pitfalls or like challenges and also the lessons learned from your experiences. And I would like to start with Lizzy, as she was sharing her experiences with us just a few minutes ago, because we see like that the digital technologies has huge potential for like making us still relevant for our audiences, and you've mentioned that really strongly. But do you see some like challenges or difficulties, or maybe like did you have some challenging or negative experiences with the open data and crowd involvement that you'd like to share with us, and what is the lesson learned from that?
Well, but that's a lot of big questions. Well, the biggest challenge, of course, is that as an institute, you're focused on your physical presence, so your museum and your museum visitors. So we did the big digital project in the Rijksmuseum when the museum was closed for renovation, which really took a lot longer than expected. But for us, it was a necessity to be digital because we had no physical space anymore and people were forgetting about us. So we used the internet as a platform to really get attention from audiences by using the internet. So in these COVID days, the internet can again be a stage or an exhibition hall for museums instead of the physical museums, because they're closed or inaccessible right now. But it is an entirely different universe from a real museum. So just putting an exhibition on your own website is probably not a very rewarding strategy. It's probably more rewarding to start collaborating with big digital players. It can range from Google Art Institute, or what is it currently called, Google Culture, to Wikimedia, or any other digital platform. I think it's you should find connections depending on what area you work in and try and find a new digital stage for your organization. But you have to be committed and you have to sort of rebalance this. So you cannot just do something for a moment and then, you know, refocus on your physical museum. Most of the community building projects that museums do are related to an exhibition. So they start, and during the exhibition you work with an audience. Okay, someone is coming into my room. So yeah, well, this is working at home. But you do it around an exhibition, and then the community is waiting for you to continue your friendship, and then you move on as an institute, and that's a big pitfall. you know, people are getting disappointed in you because you use them once and then you forget about them. So my big message would be that, you know, you probably have something that you can find a community for, and you can do any project with a community or volunteers, but you have to know their expectations, and that is that, you know, you engage with them for a long time, not just for an exhibition, or you have to really clearly communicate this to them. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it answers my question. And actually, what I hear when I was listening to your answer is also like the importance of relationships and the connections that you build, but also like this idea of niche sourcing that you've mentioned in your presentation. So maybe like it's more sustainable for institutions to focus on some small communities that you can actually build relationships with, and sustain these relationships, not just leave people behind after the project is done.
Yeah, and so that was what we did with birds in the Rijksmuseum. It's, of course, when you have 1 million objects in your collection, it's just a very tiny niche. And I have to be honest, we sort of left them behind as well after the project was finished. So I do apologize to bird watchers in the universe. But currently, we're working on camp cards from concentration camps all over Europe. So we ask people to help us transcribe them. And for each camp, there's a specific group of volunteers that is really interested in helping and transcribing them. We even had volunteers asking us permission to go on holiday, because then they wouldn't be able to transcribe, you know, cards. So these, if you find something that is interesting, and it can even just be 50 volunteers or 10 volunteers, but these 10 can do more than, I don't know, 100 of your paid employees that also have 200 different tasks. So it is better to find a very specific, very precise task or a very specific niche, and then find a group that is willing to work with you.
Yeah, and I think this is really relevant because the main question of our discussion is like how digital technologies help museums to be better citizens and better neighbors. And I think this is really important what you're saying. And also, like, I want to move now to Merete, because I know Merete has been involved with the impact and measuring impact of cultural institutions. And we also see that the whole role and notion of what museums should be is changing. And the sign of that was, for example, the fact that ICOM, so the International Council for Museums, has decided to change the definition of museum, which is like something really profound. It is a sign. And this new definition is focusing more and more on like democratizing, transparency, social justice. And how do you, from your perspective, Merete, see like how the digital technologies can help museums have impact also in the areas that seem so far away from museums as we imagine traditionally, like, so for example, social justice or social inclusion and these subjects? How do you see that?
Well, that's a brilliant question. And I think it's so topical right now because we're seeing a demand for a change of the governance of our shared culture bubbling up now more and more. And in parallel with Corona, we've seen various cultural uprisings, both around Black Lives Matter, around Me Too, you know, the wider cultural contexts that govern our societies and that are represented in how we also work with our cultural heritage. Because both Me Too and the minoritization of people of color is something that is also obvious in our art museums and in our other cultural institutions, libraries, theaters. I think that the great potential of digital media here is that it's distributed and it's dialogue based. So if we manage to bring such technologies into play that allow for an open-ended, inclusive dialogue about how to manage these really deeply rooted complex issues, that's just a first step to give the public a feeling that we are in discussion about this, we are open. And this should hopefully, ideally, start to transform how we think of ourselves as collecting, preserving, exhibiting, researching institutions, because there are new agendas. There are things that we have been blind about in our collecting practices, our exhibition practices. One exhibition after the other with white male artists. Very few minorities represented in our collections. At the Danish National Gallery, we're looking into the fact that we have colonized Greenland, but it's hardly represented in the National Gallery of Art, the art of Greenland. So there's so many issues there to dive into, and it can be greatly launched by thinking with a digital mindset and using the power of conversation and engagement that is inherent in these technologies.
Yeah, and I also see that museums are still, and I know there is research that confirms that museums are still institutions of like great public trust. And some of you mentioned that we don't have that with the media so much anymore. So I feel that there are all sorts of like new responsibilities that museum can like take on themselves, or like that they maybe are somehow they feel these responsibilities. And another thing is climate crisis, and I've been involved with some initiatives like Museums for Climate, and there are other initiatives in Europe. And how do you feel digital technologies are helping museums in this new role of like taking another completely new responsibilities?
Yeah, one example I'd like to highlight is the effort that Europeana is doing now. And Europeana used to be a very sort of top-led institution with, coming from the European Commission. But 5 years into Europeana's lifetime, it was democratized, and it handed over quite a lot of its decision-making power to the network of museum, theater, archive, library professionals from all over Europe. And that network, it's more than 3,000 people today. They are demanding through this convening platform of Europeana, they are demanding more representation for minorities. They are demanding that Europeana looks into its carbon footprint and how it can do something about that. And it's a very organic development. And I think that it's also symptomatic of how digital technologies can transform for the better the way we use culture in society, because it's a way of getting many voices into the game. And I think social media in recent years have proven many things, also some dark sides, but it has also proven that if there is a big enough demand in society to put an agenda on the table, that it will come through, even though the established media may be trying to suppress it, or politicians or something, but it will set itself forward.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for this optimistic conclusion of your answer. And now I want to also loop in Fabien into our discussion, because you've also referred to the impact that the COVID-19 is having on institutions, and also this experience and the research that describes it, the research by ICOM, how the crisis will affect museum sector. And I also wanted to ask you, so how do you feel that technologies that you are working with can help actually change museum sector, or maybe create some new bold vision for the future developments in the sector? Because definitely, like, because of this crisis that we are now experiencing, some museums will need to find new ways of like sustaining themselves and like having and like sustaining relationships with their audiences.
Yes, that's not an easy question. But
Sorry, maybe there is a strange sound. I'm not sure if you're hearing that. Yeah, so I guess we should all mute yourself except for Fabien so that he can answer the question.
it's maybe me.
Now it's much better. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, so yes, of course, I believe that new technologies will help the museum to evolve, because museum should be always in evolution, and technology is also evolving, and museum and technology should be hand in hand in the evolution with society, because as I said before, society is changing. Now people they want more experience. They want to feel more. They want to share more. They want more emotion. They want more sensations. And I think this is something the museums now lack a little bit compared to when the museums started, because it was really something incredible at the beginning to see all those pictures. It was something incredible, and I think so. Now the museum, I think, lack this sense of awe a little bit, and technology will, I'm sure, will help them to regain this. So it's really a matter of involvement of the visitors, and also creating a social interactions between them. I think that's very important.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I also see that and that's probably something that we already mentioned when we were discussing the fact that our audiences are changing with the world around us. And they, like, when we think we are competing with Netflix and other platforms, it's funny, but also I think it tells us something about what our audiences are already used to and how they are used to interact with the cultural content, basically, because we all, I think, agree that this is part of culture. And now I want to come back to Lizzy, because you were working with crowdsourcing, like all sorts of ways of crowdsourcing. And I wonder, like, what are your takeouts from that? I mean, have you learned something about what the audiences actually need or what they want from institutions? Because working with crowd probably gives you some insights about that.
Well, I would just like to go back to the previous comment, because I think
Sure.
the most important lesson for us as people working in institutes is that, you know, change also has to come from us. We have to change. So we're talking about the world that is changing, and we're like an institute sitting on this huge ocean, you know, trying to survive, but we have to change. So diversity, but also digitization is not something that you hire on Monday and it is a project that you run and it's done on Friday. You really have to change as an institute. So I'm always surprised, you know, when they talk about diversity and then they have one exhibition about, you know, the former colonies of the Netherlands. And then, you know, we go back to being a white male middle-aged museum again, whereas, you know, changes, your staff has to change, your vision of all your works of art has to change. Same goes for digital. It has to be part of your DNA. So it's not something that your intern that is 18 and looks really young and has an iPhone, so she probably knows how to operate all your social media, is going to do. But that is the situation in most museums. You know, you have the 18-year-old intern who is doing all your social media. So do you know what is going on there? Do you know how your audience is responding to your collection? Because that is where they're talking about you. That is where they're TikToking with your imagery. Do you know what they're doing with it? So that's, you have to be there. And on the other hand, when you work with crowds and crowdsourcing, we usually expect huge investments or doing difficult stuff. I actually, a lot of times I use simple Google Forms for people when they help me transcribing. They, you know, there's a send me an email button if you know something about this person, and they will, you know, send you emails and archival information, like endless emails. And so I made a couple of Google Forms, and people are really using them heavily. So now I have to look into a more complicated IT system. But, you know, a lot of times people are just willing to help you if you're willing to listen. And I think that's the first step we all have to take, is really listen to everyone. So if you get an email from a user, read it, and not just your secretary, but you should really discuss them at Monday morning meetings. You know, this is what someone wrote about our website, or this is the question I got today. Should we answer it? And of course, that is not feasible for huge museums, but you have to find ways to make it part of your DNA.
Yeah, and I think this is also probably this moment, like the COVID-19 crisis, is also a moment maybe for us as museum sector to rethink our working cultures, not only like how we work with our audiences, but how we work with each other actually, and like what is the culture of working together in our institutions. And I guess this might be a moment where we can reflect on that. And I saw that Merete was like nodding when Lizzy was talking. So like if you want to jump in, Merete, feel free, because I also want to remind our audience that they can type questions in the chat box, but I would love to hear from you, Merete, because I saw you're agreeing.
Yeah, I just, Lizzy, that was so well phrased, what you just said, that the input from our crowds, our constituents out there should be what we talk about in our Monday meetings with the board and with the directors, because it's the people we serve, and often there's too much of a distance between the people in a cultural institution who actually meet the users and the people who call the shots in the directors hall. And I think this is where impact comes in, because you can have enormous impact through some of these crowdsourced platforms, as both Lizzy and I have been talking about with Wikimedia, for instance. And I don't think that is highly enough appreciated by decision makers in the cultural sector yet. I hear very few museum directors really acknowledge the kind of value that can be fostered through citizen science, and really acknowledge that people outside the museum walls know just as much, if not more, than the experts that are hired in the museum. It's different kinds of knowledge, but we shouldn't hijack our art collections as like hostages of art historical knowledge. Artworks are open, and we should allow people everywhere to share the knowledge and the insights and the approaches to these artworks that they have.
And yeah, and I also feel like, Fabien, you were also suggesting in your presentation that you feel that museums should change in a way, and that your experience was that maybe there are some opportunities that institutions are missing because they are maybe too traditional, or maybe too afraid to experiment with certain new experiences. And like, from your experience, how do you feel this change could happen, or like what direction this change should have?
Yeah, so I think that it is changing. I see it in almost all of my contacts in the museums. I mean, for several years, but I mean, not all of them, of course. Some of them are still a bit too, let's say, encyclopedic in the exhibitions. But it is changing. It's just that inside the museums, they are not specialists in in technology. Of course, that's normal. So it's a bit scary sometimes to adopt those new technologies. It's scary. It's an investment in time, in money. You don't know if it's going to work. So it's a risk. So I understand that it's taking long for museums to adapt. With this crisis, I think that, but I'm not the one who works in a museum, but I think that museums like accelerate their evolution now, especially for digitalization. They accelerate the reassessment of their activity with this problem. I mean, they have problems with money, but before they also had this problem of sharing their knowledge, and it's still true. It's just that now maybe it's going to accelerate, and the digital persons in the museum, I see them now much more important than before inside their institution.
Yeah, and also like speaking about change, you as a producer, you work with people inside museums, right, to like make these projects happen. So how do you feel the workflow of like the museum people is very different from the way you work, and you see like that there are some things that like, what is the most important thing that you can learn from each other, for example? Can you share with us some insights about that?
So from the experts in museums, we learn, I mean, the everything, the content, what's important inside the work of art, and yeah, everything. That's really the base. But I think what they still lack is this is the storytelling. How to share this knowledge efficiently nowadays in our time. I mean, with the Louvre, it was very interesting to work with them because this is a very classical institution. This was their first virtual reality project, and I mean, they were a bit afraid at the beginning if it would be accepted by the higher instance of the Louvre, and and it worked perfectly, but it was really a risk inside of the museum. Before thinking about the public, they were thinking about politics inside the museum. So that's a constraint also for the museums. And I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, you did, and actually, I think this is really something that I saw Merete and Lizzy were strongly reacting to, because like both of you, Merete and Lizzy, you are like pioneers in the institutions that are actually the champions of like opening themselves up, and I'm sure you've seen many of such struggles inside institutions. And actually Lizzy was referring to some discussions about risks that were happening in the Rijksmuseum before like the great opening up that inspired the whole world eventually. But so I see like that, and I know there are these tensions inside museums and also like this internal struggles. But I also feel that, and this is like a question that I wanted to also ask all of you, because there are some discussions happening now that with this crisis that we are experiencing, we're also like we are in need for new bold vision for the future and how the world around us should change. And I know that, and I've been talking to people a lot about that usually culture was the resource that we can all like benefit from to actually get inspired, to get creative about the new possible scenarios for the future. And I feel that like technologies can help us distribute these new, like distribute these resources so that people can benefit from it. So if you were to imagine like what should be, like what is the thing that you would like to see happening in the museum sector with the use of digital technology, if there's one thing that you have in your mind, what would that be? I'm not sure who would like to be the first to answer.
Well, I'd like to start. I think what museums are lacking is bravery, and bravery means just do something. So we were all, due to the financial constraints and political constraints that we're in, we're always put into a position where you have to be very fundamental and grand and political. So that was also mentioned. So I remember these weird discussions about when we talked about our new website in the Rijksmuseum, where every department would fight, to get the name of its specific department in the texting of an object on the website. And we said, no one is interested in the department for 18th century textiles. They want to see your textiles, but not your department title. And that was, they wrote letters to the manager, I want my department title on the website. Whereas I think, well, experiment. You don't need a big budget, but have a Saturday morning with the crowd and an annotation project, or like the projects that Merete showed. A lot of them I don't think are very expensive projects. It's just go outside of your institute, go play outside, go play with digital media. Get someone from a university or high school, or get your own nephew and start doing something weird, or just see what your kids do in the museum and play with it. Record a TikTok movie in your museum and see if it works, or if it doesn't work. It will probably not work, but take time to experiment and see what works, because I don't think that the grand vision is going to fall upon your rooftop next week if you stay behind your desk and wait for it to fall on your rooftop.
Thank you, Lizzy. And I do feel that like if we want to inspire society to actually have this ground vision, we also have to do something. I mean, we need that vision, but we also need the visions to inspire others. And I see there's one question from the audience, so let me just look at it. There is a question about whether you have experiences with supporting teachers or parents in education during the pandemic, when teachers and equally pupils, students have very difficult, they have difficulties accessing heritage because they can't go to museums. If there is a person in the room who'd like to answer that question, please go ahead. Yeah, Merete, go ahead, please.
Yeah, we experienced during the lockdown this spring an enormous demand for education materials. And our educators almost couldn't keep up with the demand. But more than just asking for materials, the teachers, the educators out there really wanted to collaborate with the museum to make the teaching materials as relevant and precise as possible. And this, it wasn't exactly news, but it's something that made us realize that also once COVID-19 at some point draws back, there's great potential in being an education facilitating institution in a digital world, because there are a lot of learners out there who won't necessarily come to the museum and do education workshops or go to our teaching center or whatever, but we have amazing resources to repeat coming from a trustworthy source that in the hands of learners can really make a difference. And I think I'd like to also come back to your question from before, what's the new bold vision for for museums. I see it at the crux of, I already mentioned these two things, but I'd like to just wrap up or summarize that it's at the crux of supporting creativity in society with the collections we hold. When we open those up digitally, it's building blocks for people's creativity, and it's a really it's a massive potential there, because creativity fosters engagement in society. It fosters new solutions. When you're creative, you're problem solving. I think that's important to highlight. And then the other part of this crux is what I mentioned about flooding the internet with trustworthy data. There's a new book coming out by an American called Peter B. Kaufman. It's called The New Enlightenment, and it deals with this question of how the cultural sector can counter misinformation in society today. So keep a lookout for that one.
Thanks so much. We will. And I see there's one more question in the chat, so I will read it out loud for you in a minute. But I wanted to also stress, I've once heard an American curator and scholar, Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblet, saying that she actually feels and believes that museums as public institutions, publicly funded, can be R&D labs for the society. And I not only believe that, but I also want to believe that. And I feel like this crisis might be a good moment for us to actually focus more on like becoming that. And there's one question, I guess, for all of you. Our audience member is asking if when culture is actually happening online, or like is transmitted online, don't you think it's somehow devaluated? Do you think there is the deep, true, intimate experience of culture is possible with this mediation of like a computer or a headset or whatever you need to actually experience that? Is there a person in the room that would like to answer this question? Yeah, Fabien, go ahead.
So I think that seeing a work of art in another way than just watching it is not devaluating it. It's just a different way to see it. It can be very, very, very different. It can be, I mean, just a screen is something, but it's a screen. Is it interactive? Can you turn around? Can you zoom to a certain level that you couldn't do it in real life? Or maybe you have access of a scan and you can see inside, or you can see some I don't know, for a sculpture you can see like slices of it. You can have information on the materials and this kind of thing. So for me, it's not like the real thing. It's a different thing, but it is as good as the real experience. For me, it's for us, for example, for the immersive expedition, when we make the visitors explore the Khufu pyramid, it's not to replace the real visit. It's to understand more this monument and creating an emotional link with it, and then the visitor, they want to go there for real, because then they know it now. And that was also interesting for the Mona Lisa. Mona Lisa, the experience was not, I mean, it was in the Da Vinci exhibition, and in the Da Vinci exhibition, there was no Mona Lisa. Mona Lisa was in its room, Salle des États, which was a bit far from the exhibition. What's interesting is that the people who did the Mona Lisa experience, then they wanted to see the Mona Lisa for real, because now they knew her in a different way, and so you can also do that remotely. You can do that at home, and create emotional link is very important. It's not the same thing as the real thing. It's a different thing, but it's very good as well.
Yeah, like I'm just making sure and checking if you, Merete, or you, Liz, you would like to pick up this question as well, because you've also have shown us some ways in which actually this can be an enriching experience. But maybe you have anything to add.
Yeah, I'd just like to repeat that sometimes a digital version of an artwork can make people feel closer to the art, because you know, there are some maybe young people or people not especially interested in art. They feel often a bit estranged in museums. Sometimes they maybe feel bored. They don't know, you know, what should I do with all these paintings hanging on the wall? We know from studies that a lot of people spend less than, you know, just a few seconds in front of every painting. And that's the beauty of digitizing and opening up, because if you allow people to actually work with the digitized artworks, they spend a lot of time on the individual artwork. They get their hands on it. They look at the details. They, you know, they get personal with the artwork. And as I quoted from this taboo workshop, that one of the participants said that it made a difference for her to feel so close to the artwork and have it between her hands. So I don't think we should ignore that kind of significance in digitizing. That said, of course, it's not the same thing, and it's like you know, comparing apples and oranges to. But one thing I'd like to stress, because that's often you know, something that people are afraid of in the cultural sector, is that if we put things online, people will just stay at home with their iPad in the sofa. But I think safely we can say, looking back at 10, 15 years of constant digitizing and providing more and more quality online, that we're seeing the opposite, that the more generously we share the experiences that the museum holds, the more people actually want to go.
I think this is a great conclusion for our discussion, actually, because I feel that the things that you've been sharing with us throughout the whole day were like how important it is to be like in contact with your audiences, in touch with them, like to listen to them, to also like sustain and take care for these connections and relationships we establish, and how digital technologies can help us stay relevant and be more relevant, not just by like trying to supplement something, but like offering us completely new possibilities that weren't there before. And I think this is a very powerful way of like thinking about it, because we can think of like different ways in which we can reach out to our audiences, stay relevant for them. And especially like with this experience that we've just had and we were having through like all around the world with the COVID crisis, I feel we experience this, like how much this can be powerful and strong, like in being in touch with our communities. So I wanted to thank you all for being with us today. It's been a great pleasure, and thank you for finding time and being with us. And I hope everybody in the room got really inspired by our speakers' professional experience and enjoyed this day. And now, after a very, very short break in 2 minutes, the next and the last panel of the day will start. So the next part will be led by my colleague from Andrzej Wajda Center for Film Culture, Kinga Gałuszka, who will moderate a final debate about Polish digital platforms. So it is time for me to say thank you to all of you. Thank you to our wonderful panelists, and have a great discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks.